Now, I haven't brought along the wrong PowerPoint, but this is where this little investigation started. This is a little talk that Jane and I gave to the Archaeology Festival last year, and Mark, if we were here last night, he gave us an introduction to that. And one of our starting points there was I wanted to look at trade and exchange, and so we were taking the material from the museum collection, and hiding behind that is the Rhodian amphora, which we're going to have a look at later. This chap here is the King's Zone 117, and the other thing is this Dressel 20, which is in the case there. And if you turn the picture round, you can read the stamp, and it's this one here, Virginiensia. And so, as part of the research for doing this little talk last year, I went to this site, which I guess a lot of people here will know, the SAPAC site, where you can log in down there. You do have to have a password and an access code. And this list, there's a huge database here of Dressel 20 amphoras. I'm sure people here know this. Yes? And so I went there, I looked up Gloucester King's Home, because what I was looking for was any more information about that stamp that was in the case there. And I was very distressed to find that there were only 7 Dressel 20 stamps in this database. 2 of them from King's Home here, and 5 of them from Gloucester. And my one, the one I was looking for, the VIRG one, which is in the case, isn't in there. These are the images that they've got. They've got images of a smaller number of them. And so we've got a couple there from Hurst's excavations, one here from Caroline Hayway's, the Gates site. We'll be coming back to this one later. And then 3 here from a publication by Crackwell, which relates to MSc work, which Colin was part of in the 1980s. I was even more distressed to find that from Cirencester there were 76 stamps. And this is just the first page. There's a second page down here which we're not going to bother about at the moment. So I was starting to think about why is there this sort of discrepancy and what's going on and where's the source of this data. As you can see from this bibliography here, quite a lot of these things come from a monograph by Carreras and Funari, which is this one here, which is published by the team who organised the SAPAC database, and this was work done up until the 1998. You can see the date there. So there we are. We've got Cirencester up the top here with 66, and you go down this list of sites, and we can see a lot of sort of interesting military sites and all the usual suspects, Richborough and all the other places. And here's poor old Gloucester right down the bottom. So I pursued this for a little bit longer, and you come, of course, to the great Maurice Callender and his book from 1965, which we all know, particularly anybody who was working in amphora work in the 1970s and 80s, as some of us would have been. And this is now available as a download from the University of Durham website, though you might notice that they can't spell amphora. So what's in there? Well, again, Cirencester, there's 31 specimens in Maurice Callender's book from Cirencester, of which 10 are from an earlier museum guide, and this is the listing from the museum guide. This has been his starting point. Then there were 21 others which were in the museum collection, and then the football scores down the bottom: Chedworth 1, Gloucester 0. So there's nothing in this data set which relates to Gloucester. If we go to the full SAPAC data set through their website, again, we got Cirencester at the top here, list of all forts and whatnot. So that's Cirencester, that huge red blob there. Gloucester is the tiny, tiny little blob next to it. And there's other interesting absences, shall we say, from this map. There's nothing from Bath, for instance, which I don't think can really be right. So there's another way of getting into this data set, and this is this website here, the Roman Open Data, which invites you to explore the data. And the thing about this site here, is that you can log onto it without any passwords or anything like that. It's just an open data set. And we can, if you go onto there, you can put in readings. So in this case, we've put in MQFF, which is one of the Gloucester stamps. And you can get to a map like this. As you zoom in and out of this map, these spots will expand. So that little cluster over there is the Gloucester one and the Cirencester one are sort of merged together because of the scale of the mapping. And then we've got various other bits and pieces on here. We're going to just go through this. So there's our Gloucester one. You click over on top of that spot and that pops up, and that's the one from the Gates excavations, which is just here. Microscopic drawing, but that's what we've got. Then down the bottom in Spain, you can click down there, you get another picture, and that's from this survey which was done by Ponsish in 1982, a French survey, multi-volume French survey of the archaeology in the Guadalquivir Valley. But what that's telling us is that that's the name of the production site, Malpica-sur, just there. And you can go to this book and look that up. So taking some of the data from the SAPAC database, I've just plotted them back onto a map of the Guadalquivir Valley. So Cadiz is down on the floor, and the Atlantic is out in the west, and this is the Guadalquivir. And we've got specimens from, this is the one that's in the museum collection, the VIRG one, which comes from that end of the valley. We've got one of these, which is from the MSc excavations from the 1980s, which comes from the centre. And then this fellow here, which comes from Malpica, just there. And Malpica, there's a second set of work, more recent work that's been done by large multinational teams who are publishing large monographs like this. Again, this comes from the University of Barcelona. It's one of their major publications. This is Bourgeon. And she's taken all the production areas down the river Genil, Spanish, Genil, I think it's Genil. And this is the images that she's got of the Malpica site, which is on this curve of the river, and the production area is just here. So, and there's a photo, overhead photo, and this is the sort of thing where the river is just washing away huge assemblages of amphoras. But we can do better than that, because when I was doing this work, I was slightly surprised that I'd actually been to this site about 30 years ago. That's me. That's the slope coming off the higher ground, the flatter ground to the top, sloping down towards the river, which would be down the bottom here. That's what a field walking assemblage looks like on a Dressel 20 amphora site. There's, well, anything you want really. There's sherds and handles and whatnot sticking out of and into the ditches and everywhere. Here's another load. And they're still growing olive trees all over this site. Yes, good drainage. So that's what these sites actually look like when you get out there. I mean, astonishing archaeology, really. So let's just have a look at this map again. So we've had a look at the one from Gloucester. We've had a look at the one from down here at Malpica. So what's this blob? Anybody? Monte Testaccio. Monte Testaccio. There. So this is the Tiber. This is the Aurelian Wall. This is the Protestant cemetery where Kelly and Keats and Shelley, thank you, are buried. And that's the Monte Testaccio. But from these overhead shots, what you don't get is the size of this thing. You don't get that from the overheads. It's astonishing. Here's some of the local transport system waiting for its lunch. This is how we got there. So that's the view from the top. And you can see how small the cars are, so you can see how high this thing are. And also a hint for anybody who's interested in having a road named after them, you should invent an amphora typology. There you are, that's the great Dressel. You'll recognise some of the people on this slide. This is Jeff Donnell. This is the Fautores meeting of the Rei Criteria Romana Fautores, International Roman Pottery Group meeting in 2002. So that's Jeff. This is Colin Wells, who was president of the society at the time, and we're all standing around waiting for a talk. And the person we're waiting for a talk on is this chap here, who's Jose Remesal Rodriguez, correct? Thank you. Who is the guy who's in charge of the Barcelona project, the SAPAC, and all those publications. They all come out of his work. The great John Hayes, and the back of Kay Hartley's head. So All the great and the good were there. So how's this SAPAC data being used? And here we're overlapping slightly with some of the things that we've just heard about. It's being used by particularly teams based around the Barcelona University as a sort of quarry for looking at inter-site analyses. They're looking in detail at the lists of potters, stamps, workshops and so forth that are present on different types of site. And what they're searching for is some sort of interpretation for the underlying patterns, like different groups of traders, as was being mentioned, who direct their wares in different directions. And essentially, they're looking, well, one of the things they're looking for is if you've got a site with stamps of a particular group, is it more or less likely you're going to get stamps of another group as well? So you're trying to cluster together both sites and also producers. And this is just one of their papers from 2018, and they're looking at material from the northern border. And as we saw from all those earlier lists, there's a lot of data from all these sites up in the north, Chesters and Halsteads and Vindelander and all that. And so they'll start off with something like a cross-tabulation here. So we've just got production areas down there. I had to chop Malpica off to get the text in. And then these are the places where they're turning up and numbers and so forth. So this is fairly standard sort of stuff. The other way they're looking at it is they're looking at sources. So these are groups of production areas and dates. So we've got this big one here, which is the big cluster that comes from the kiln sites in the Lacatria area. And Malpica, which is, I did see it earlier. Where is it? There, yeah, that's the one with the little circles, which is that one there. So they're looking at interactions between production and chronology in that case. And then they go on to something that's a little bit like this, so network analysis. So here we've got in the jargon of network analysis, of which I'm not a specialist, you've got things called nodes and things called edges. So the nodes are the points, and then the lines connecting these sites and producers together are what they call the edges. So you've got to think of this, if you want to think of it in a sort of mechanical way, you've got a series of weights which are connected by springs of different strengths. And if you shake it around a bit, it'll settle in a slightly different way. But it's the principle, the largest groups, the groups with the largest assemblages, London, Colchester, Mainz and all those sorts of things, and the major producers that create the basic structure, and everything else sort of fits into that. And this is the way that they're approaching this. And what they're particularly interested in is this cluster here, which are sites up in the north, because they're looking for interactions between groups of potters and also interactions between sites, and the suggestion being that certain sites are the entry points, if you like, for the whole of the wall system, redistribution points. Right. This is not modern art. Again, you can download the entire SAPAC data set as it is and feed it into this software here, which is called Gephi, which is a graphical analysis, a network analysis system. And again, the points are either production or consumption points, producers and consumers, as we had in the previous, and the lines, the strength of the lines between them reflects the interactions between those two levels. And then you look at that and you think, you can play with this forever. I mean, it's an incredibly rich data set, and this software takes a bit of getting used to. But you can try and find out, you might say, where's Gloucester in this lot? And the answer is, unfortunately, it's right out there. Because there's so little data in their data set from Gloucester, it just gets flung out into the outer darkness because it's not contributing anything to this pattern here. It's simply reactive to the weights of the other data. So here's a phrase some people might recall from distant history. So there's known unknowns. That is, there are some things we know we do not know. And we know that the assemblage of Dressel 20 stamps from Gloucester is incomplete. We've got one in the case for a start. I saw another one on one of the slides this morning, and there will be others. So how incomplete is this record? Does it matter? And I think it does matter, because these data sets are being taken and then they're building hypotheses on top of them. And it's not only that Gloucester doesn't appear on that map, but it's not actually contributing on that plan, on that plot. It's not contributing anything very much to that plot. Whereas a larger assemblage would contribute both to its interpretation and also to the interpretation of the other sites that are on the plot. So that's one of the problems. When I was a student, if we ever got a picture of Dressel 20 amphora, it would be based on distributions. It would be placed on something like this, which is the Port Vendre wreck site, and then a series of plots, most of which come from CIL and Calendar. Nowadays, you tend to get distributions like this. Again, this is from one of the Spanish sites, and so they now consider that there's an Atlantic distribution, and then this little arrow, now I don't know where that's going. I mean, is it going round the corner and up into the Severn? Yes, says Graham. So there's a different pattern of supply into these areas than there is down into the Mediterranean, and that's being shown by some of this network analysis data. So I was sat in the SVECAG meeting in Brussels last weekend, minding my own business in the back row, and this popped up. And it's the re-evaluation of amphoras from humid contexts. And I thought that might be relevant, possibly. That was the slide. And these are the illustrations which are in the paper. Their conclusion is that reuse of amphorae seems closely linked to harbour towns. Now, this is just a few examples. This one's from Lyon. These three are from Lyon, which is a riverside consolidation of the Rhône. This lot down here is from Fosse-sur-Mer, where they're stabilising marshland with disused amphorae. But in this case here, they're actually inside pine boxes, substantial pine boxes, and they pile these amphoras in them and then fill them up. That's the consolidation of the marshland. There's another example here. 814 amphoras. I think these look like Tarraconensian ones from the colours. And this is Zaragoza. So there's the town, and it's this area here. There's another river that comes in here and creates a marshy area, and that's been consolidated by large groups of discarded amphoras. I mean, really large groups of discarded amphoras. So a question might be, is this sort of reuse system relevant to what's going on in Gloucester? So I leave it with Hirst's quote from 1999, "The study of the waterfronts must be accounted a failure of the last 30 years, because there has been relatively little work in this area." These are the lines of the two suggested river frontages. So there's a lot of land in between that's being filled up with something. Gloucester, this isn't news to locals. Gloucester has a flooding problem. That photograph is taken from about here. This is the folk, the front. That there is that church tower. And water floods up there. These are the lines of the two waterfronts. And so I'm asking, perhaps, this wall painting, which I think a lot of people will know, it's from Augst in Switzerland. Could this have been a scene from Roman Gloucester? A question. And if it is, are they carrying them from the docks up into the town? Or are they carrying from the town to backfill the docks? Is a sort of question that you might wish to pose. That's my last slide. When you go out the door onto Westgate and up to the first corner, if you look from that corner up to the church tower, that's the size of Monte Testaccio. you walk up there and you think this is 22 million amphoras or whatever it is. That's the size of this thing. So that's all I've really wanted to say about the very few Dressel 20 amphoras from Gloucester, and just some thoughts about how we might be approaching that problem, and how why I think it's important we try and extend these data sets, because they are being used in these sorts of ways, and it's important that we contribute to that. Okay.